Hi and welcome to number 2 of my quick watercolour tips series, a new series looking at tips and techniques that I've picked up along the way on my watercolour journey and hopefully sharing with you a few things that you'll find helpful. I've created a playlist called Quick Watercolour Tips, nothing original but just straightforward and to the point, and hopefully it will build into a very useful resource for you. Today's tip is going to be showing you what to do if you try for some dry brush, that lovely sparkly technique here where you get sort of hit and miss on the texture of the paper and it doesn't work, so you end up with just a blocky look rather than that delicate sparkle. This is something in watercolour painting that's such a useful technique to learn, and I'll be doing a tip later on about successful dry brush painting, but for now I want to just show you what to do if you find it difficult to create dry brush texture sort of reliably. And it is quite a tricky thing, especially for beginners to learn, and it can be very frustrating because you could create a beautiful painting and then just by not being able to get a correct dry brush texture like this, where you get this lovely sparkle of either the white paper showing through below or the paint underneath showing through a darker dry brush stroke, which can be really effective and particularly effective for catching that light sparkling on the water effect. So what's my tip then? Well, it's quite a straightforward tip. Here on this mountain scene that I painted, I needed some dry brush across the foreground and I didn't get it. So my foreground is looking really flat. I think you can see here across the foreground, the water, it's a nice colour, it's a nice tone, but it's lacking in that little bit of sparkle of light, just catching the water across here. So if you look further back, you can see that I've managed to get sort of keep some light here. Some of this is through negative painting, some of this is through catching a bit of dry brush, but in the front it didn't work. So I'm going to have a go at repairing this painting. But first of all, I'm going to show you the technique on a couple of scraps of painted watercolour paper. And I think it's important to stress, before you try this out on a painting that you really like, try it out on some scraps of paper first to make sure that you're using this technique properly. Because there's no going back from this. What we're going to do is slightly damage the paper. Now, it's important to stress that if you want to use this technique, you need to be using either a cold press paper with a texture or rough watercolour paper. It won't work on smooth, because what we're doing here is we are going to be exploiting the fact that the paper has a texture, which I hope you can see on camera there. As with dry brush, where you just catch the paint on the texture of the paper and you don't paint the pits of the texture, this technique uses sandpaper, yes, sandpaper, or an emery board, the type that you file your nails with. And what we're going to do is lightly sand off the top of the texture of the paper and therefore the paint, to reveal the paper just across the bumps of the paper, if you see what I mean. So on these old scraps of paper, I'm just going to show you, be gentle with it, because all we're trying to do is take off the texture of, well, the top of the textural bumps of the paper, if you see what I mean. You can see I'm sort of brushing off the dust, so it is actually damaging the paper, but what it's also doing is giving us back something that looks just like dry brush. And please note, I don't claim to have invented this process. I found out about it by reading some of the how-to books by the late, great Roland Hilder. and people like John Blockley. There's a lot of the watercolour masters from the past that have used this technique as well to great effect. So it is a well-known technique, but one that just must be used with care, because of course you are causing a little bit of damage to the paper, and removing the surface of it in places to reveal the paper. So in a way you're sort of also removing the sizing from the paper. So if you were to paint over this dry brush sparkle, it wouldn't be quite the same as painting on top of ordinary paper. This is why I say practice on some old scraps of paper first before you try it out on your painting. And then it's important also to stress that the directionality of your sanding, a little bit like the direction of your brushwork, is really important. The surface of the water is flat, so we want to keep our sanding sort of horizontal. If we just do any old sort of sanding strokes, we might end up with really strange looking texture, and the directionality of which may end up looking a bit strange. So keep your sanding strokes horizontal like this, and you can see I'm just revealing a bit of the white paper beneath the paint, sanding off that paint lightly. You can see we're getting that texture back quite nicely now. I'm just going to use the edge of the emery board to put in some sort of highlights, some lines almost. I know Scott Swinson and other people will create similar sort of highlights and things using a razor blade or a Stanley knife. You can do that as well for things like horizon lines or water lines. Although that's not something that I've tried, just take a look at Scott Swinson's videos if you're interested. And another thing that I forgot to say at the beginning is, of course, this will only work on a bone dry painting. So it's not something you can go and do straight away when you've made the incorrect or unsuccessful dry brush stroke and the paper is wet, because you will tear the paper. So it's really important that the painting, as I say, must be absolutely bone dry before you try this. And again, I'll say it needs to be paper with a texture. So cold press paper, or not as it's otherwise known, or rough surface paper, but this will not be so successful on a smooth paper like a hot press, although it may be worth experimenting on some scraps of hot press paper just to see what sort of effects you can get, because you may discover something interesting and unique this way. Well, I hope this watercolour tip was useful. Please let me know in the comments if you have any similar tips. So take a look in the comments. You never know, you might find some more really interesting ideas for you to try out there. So I'll be back next week with another watercolour tip. So please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and click on the bell icon, then you'll be notified whenever we post. And thank you so much to everyone that supports us on Patreon. And if you'd like to join us on Patreon and support the channel, then please follow the links below. Thanks so much and happy painting. Bye.